Hello and welcome to this edition of Group Talk, the X Series, Q&A with XPages experts. You'll be hearing from Paul Calhoun, Chris Toohey, and Matt White of GBS, and Howard Greenberg, Paul De La Nebbia, and Rob from TLCC. Without further ado, here's Paul.
Hello, hello. How's everyone doing this, I guess, morning, afternoon, evening? I'm going to start off, basically we're going to go through a series of presentations here and give y'all some snippets and overviews of how to just basically overall improve your XPages design experience. One thing that I've been doing for a long time since XPages was in first beta is working in the XPage design environment and trying to make it a better experience from a development perspective. One of the things that I find pretty much worldwide when we're on tour doing seminars and speaking is that there's still a lot of developers who are misunderstood about the fact that Designer and the new Notes client actually sit on top of Eclipse, which is a Java-based client. Right out of the box, Domino Designer DDE runs on what we call a Java heap size, and the default heap size for that is 256 meg of RAM. On most of our systems today, most development systems, we've been in seminars where people have had as much as 16 gigs of RAM in their development box. On my current box, I've got 4 gig. A lot of people have 8. So being able to bump this value up, if you don't do anything else, our recommendation is you bump it to at least 512 and 128. If you do this to these particular values, you're going to see immediate performance benefit in your Domino Designer as well as your Notes client experience. It's going to make both of those things behave significantly better. If you go in and you have more memory than 4 gig, again, you can kind of bump this up even higher, again, depending upon what else you're running. So you can actually go in and set these. The values are set in the jvm.properties file, which is located in your Notes installation directory in the framework RCP deploy folder. The jvm.properties file is just a text file. Open it up in Notepad or WordPad or TextEdit or whatever your favorite editor tool might be, and you're going to modify those first 2 lines. So again, assuming you're on a system with at least 2 gig of RAM, there's nothing wrong at all with setting this up to as high as 1/4 of your total RAM. The very first line is the total amount of heap that you have available to you. And that second line is the actual starting heap size, and the default value for that again is very small. It's 48 meg. What that means is when DDE and Notes start, that they basically have to keep growing that page size. Typically I find when I start DDE, if I'm monitoring my heap size, right off the bat before I've done anything, it's grown to 70 meg. So if you started out at 128, again, you're going to see a startup experience that's significantly better than if you leave it at the default at 48. So again, with systems that have significantly more memory now, this is very, very beneficial. Another thing that was introduced in A5 is working sets. One of the things that we highly recommend you do is keep your working sets, your applications organized into working sets, and you keep your working sets fewer to 20 applications. When you go into Open Domino Designer, the number of applications that you have in any given working set is again going to affect your overall startup performance. So keep the number of applications per working set small. At a bare minimum, what you don't want to do is have every application you've ever opened outside of a working set in Designer so that you see all of those applications every time you open Designer. That's just going to significantly increase the amount of time that Designer has to go through and open things. So if you're not familiar with working sets, become familiar with them, get used to those, and start using them. I also find that this is kind of another secret kind of thing that Domino developers are unaware of. Behind the scenes, because Notes is now, the Notes Designer is now built on top of Eclipse, is behind the scenes, every application that you open is a virtual project, and this is basically creates this virtual project, virtual file system that it manages things through. And if you're like me, especially if you have a desktop machine that you develop on, I'll open Domino Designer and I'll just keep opening databases and keep working and keep working and keep working until something causes my computer to crash, and then I reboot. And so I've talked to developers, again, all over the world, and they'll say, you know, I start in the morning, and Domino Designer is very responsive, it's very peppy, and then as I continue to go throughout the day, it just gets slower and slower and slower. And that's because every time you double-click on an application to open it, it's going to open this corresponding, virtual project. Now, what a lot of folks are not aware of is the fact that you can actually go to the Package Explorer view, and if that view is not already in your system, you can enable that just by going to Windows Show Views, Package Explorer. You can right-click on these open projects, and you can choose Close Project. And when you close the project, that's going to give those resources back to the Domino Designer. So again, on any given day, I may have opened 20 or 30 applications. If I'm very diligent about closing those when I'm done working on them, then again, I find that throughout the entire day, my entire overall DD experience is better. What you'll also notice is that you can right-click on one application and you can close unrelated projects. So rather than going and closing individual projects, you can go and select the application that you want to continue working on and then close every other project. And again, you're going to see that those resources are then kind of returned to the system. And throughout the day, as you continue working in DD, you're going to have just a significantly better experience. Last but not least, we know that working inside the XPages, if you haven't already embraced the source view, then you're going to find that, especially in more advanced applications, if you've got the Mastering XPages book, that we do a lot of site coding inside of the source view in XPage development. This is an XML-based syntax. So to make it easier to read, we know that we can go in to open any XPage source, and we can hit Control-Shift-F, which is going to format it. But what a lot of people are unaware of is what is that formatting based upon? And that formatting is based upon the actual preferences that are set in Domino Designer. So if you go into Preferences, and you can actually go into Preferences, and rather than trying to find it, you can actually type XML up into the filter here. That'll show you the editor, and you can turn on one of these two checkboxes. The first one is Split Multiple Attributes on a new line. At a minimum, I always turn that on every time I configure a new Domino Designer. And the reason for that is as I'm creating XPages or importing or opening them, then what that's going to do is format each of these attributes on its own line. And when I'm looking at the source, that's going to make the source view significantly easier to read. It's going to be able to, and I know a lot of folks that, still, take their code and they print it out. So, you can print this out, you can copy and paste it into application documentation systems, and then, again, it's just going to make that overall experience better. So, again, not a lot of tips, but, very powerful, so I hope y'all can incorporate these and overall improve your development experience using XPages. Thanks for tuning in this morning, and I will give it back to Ms. Dawn, or someone that already took it away from me.
That was me. This is Paul Delanebbia, not to be confused with Paul Calhoun, but, in certain spheres, that's not a bad thing either. But I'll be the moderator, and I'm going to hand off control and introduce our next presenter. Paul, you wanted to wait in, didn't you? Anyway, our next presenter is Matt White, well-known XPages expert. He's out of London. He wears several hats. He's with Oguji Software. He's with the London Developer Co-op and XPages 101 as well. And his topic is the XPages Toolbox. So let me hand over. And Matt, you should be able to present now.
Cool. Thanks, Paul. Hopefully you can see my slides. So welcome everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's getting close to beer o'clock for me, so this is my last thing before going to the pub this evening. So I'm going to talk about a project on OpenNTF, which is maybe less well known than it should be, and it's to do with finding performance issues in your XPages applications. So this is a project which Philippe Briand from IBM released onto OpenNTF, and what it allows you to do is to basically identify performance issues at different levels within your application. So the project is called the XPages Toolbox, and you can just Google that, or you can go to openntf.org and download it from there. And what you'll get is a zip file that contains some jar files that need to be copied onto your server, and an NSF. And this is something that you should only use on your development or your test servers, because there are some slight security issues involved. It would be possible in theory to access data when this monitor is running. So it's something that you would use in a non-secure environment. So once you've got the jar files onto your server, and the install is very simple, you would restart HTTP and open the NSF which comes with the download, and you'll see a screen like this with several tabs, and the one that is most interesting, I think, is the CPU profiler. What this allows you to do is track how long each chunk of code in your application takes to load when the user is accessing pages. So in this screenshot, what I've done is I've clicked the Start Wall Time Profiler button, and then I've just clicked around in an application that I've created. And then the second line of this view here, you can see a function called getImageHTML, and it's taking an enormous amount of time. All of these numbers here are milliseconds. So each time this is loading, it's taken 31 seconds to load, where everything else is taking tens of milliseconds only. So there's obviously a massive performance issue here, and I've deliberately inserted some bad code in this function, because obviously I would never create code that is slow and performs badly. But what you may find is, for example, if you're opening an inefficiently designed view, or you're going off and doing a network operation that's taking a long time, you might want to redesign your code to work around that. So you might want to cache results, or at least display a spinner or something to the user to say that something is happening and we'll be right back to you. So what this is shown here is that my function getImageHTML has some performance issues. And that may be enough to track down the problem. But there is an extra thing which you can use, which will help you identify in even more detail what the problem is. So in your server-side JavaScript, so I've gone off and gone to my getImageHTML function, you can use this syntax of __ profile, and then in brackets you just give a chunk of code a name. So I've just called it XPages 101 test in this case. And hopefully it's obvious why my code is so slow. It's because I've put a sleep command in that just tells the code to basically go to sleep for a second every time it's called. So I've just put that code block around that one line of code. And now when I rerun the wall profiler, you can see my chunk of code is highlighted here, and it's been called 6 times, and it's taken exactly 6 seconds to run those 6 times. So that sort of explains exactly why that chunk of code is slow. The rest of the getImageHTML function in those 6 times has taken 11 milliseconds to run. So there really isn't a problem in the rest of the code. It's just that one chunk that's been causing it to be slow. And in fact, it's worth noticing that the rest of this XPages application, nothing is taking more than 50 milliseconds to load. So it's incredibly fast as a general rule, but obviously this one thing is taking a long time. So this tool is really useful at identifying these performance issues, so that you can track down exactly where you've gone wrong and hopefully fix that, or at least notify the user that something is happening. There are other tools other utilities within the profiler, but that one is the one that I find most useful. So you can download it from openntf.org, and the project is called XPages Toolbox. And then there's some contact details for me. My name's Matt White, so I'm on Twitter, email, and my website is xpages101.net.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And we're going to continue with our next presenter, who is Chris Toohey of GBS, well-known XPages expert and known as the go-to guy at GBS. His official title is GBS Guru, so read into that whatever you like. He's very involved in the OpenNTF, and his topic today is XPages custom controls. And it appears oh, there you are. Let me make you the presenter, Chris.
Great. Thanks, Paul. There we go, just showing out the screen. I'll start the slide deck. And there we go. Good morning, everyone. My topic, as Paul mentioned, XPage custom controls. We're going to go over properties and their application. So first, what is a custom control? Then we're going to talk about custom control properties. And then I'm going to show you an example and quick online demo that you can access, of course, after this webinar. So what's a custom control? A custom control is an XPage. It's reusable, configurable, and extremely powerful. Think of it as a micro XPage. It can contain XPage markup, HTML, CSS, server and client-side JavaScript. It can be used multiple times within a single XPage, and it can really be used to componentize XPage apps for real code singularity and to really speed up the maintenance task that comes with applications. You'll see that within this example of how easy it is to create a reusable custom control that you can feed properties into. So what's a custom control property? It takes the shape of a string, Boolean, integer, object, or pretty much any other type of value, and you create a property on a custom control for in-control use. They can be accessed within the control via the composite data object. So for example, on screen now you can see the block custom control. I pass it a property of foo, which equals hello world. The block custom control uses that in a core text control, and it simply uses the JavaScript prefix composite data.foo. So that custom control would simply report hello world back as a computed field or computed text. So let's get on with the example and demo. We've seen tons of websites that have horizontal and vertical navigators. These simple menus, you can find them. I have examples here, Apple, Google, and Expedia.com. So how can I use a custom control? The goal for this example and demo is to create a simple, reusable, and easily maintainable navigation system for an XPage application. So we get started. We'll create the Navigator custom control. We're going to use a series of XPage controls, core controls, and pass through HTML. And I'll show you that markup in a second. Now there's two properties we'll pass through. The tabs, which is an object, it's an array of menu items that's going to be used by the repeat control, and active, which is a string, which will highlight, if you want conditionally, which tab is active at any given point. And this is the custom control. Now you won't see the properties defined within the markup for that, and I'll go back to the previous slide. You'll need to go into the property definition of the control, so simply highlight the custom control, and in the properties pane you'll see the property definition. You can go in there and create a new property, create a new group of properties, position them as you will, and you'll be able to set what type it is, the display name. You'll also be able to pass through a description, so when other developers or you revisit it in 6 months, you know what the heck it is. So we'll go back. Now this is a very basic HTML unordered list. Inside that is a repeat control that's based off of the composite data tab, creates a variable tab. It has simple text. Now the tag name overwrites the text or span, and it creates a list item. The escape is set to false. Style class is blank, so I don't get any style class overrides. I was going for a quick and dirty example here. And I simply take the composite data tabs value per value and loop through and create a list item. And if the handle matches the active tab, and I can show you the markup, if you will, and you'll see it in the demo application, it sets the isActive class to active. That way you can highlight which tab you're on. And that's pretty much it. Now to see this in practice, here's the label href, so where I'm pointing, and the handle. So if home, in this case, matches the active state, then you're active. You can create CSS that cues off of what's active and what's inactive. So here's just a simple SSJS function that I can use to pass through, and I use a switch case here to, okay, well, I have this type of this menu, this menu, this menu. And now I can have as many menus on a page as I want. Now this is a home.xsp typical layout. You've got your SSJS library, you've got your CSS resources, and you have multiple navigators here. And you can see that I'm passing through the SSJS functions, and I'm either with this home navigator, this one right here. You can see I'm not passing an argument, so it's going to return the default within that switch case. Otherwise, the navigator, I can pass it through, and it'll actually return a different menu. And I can say which one should be active, which one shouldn't be active. And of course, those can be calculated as well. This is what I get when I render that by default. It's a very simple unordered list, pretty standard, and it's just generated markup, and it definitely needs some style. If we take a look at some applied CSS, so any UL navigator displays inline block, its width is 100%, list items, their list style is none, the links within a list item display inline block, and you can really play around with the overall look and feel, and as a bonus you can actually build out different navigation specific CSS. So the end result, you have this nice tabbed interface just from that CSS, the applied CSS, and it looks really cool. Again, I have an active state of home for the default navigator. The alternate didn't have an active state defined. So let's take it a few steps further, and we can extend the getTabs function to allow more alternate keys, if you will, and new menus. So I have the standard navigation, and if I apply some CSS to those unordered lists, I now get this entire application look and feel where that looks like an app as opposed to just some miscellaneous unordered lists on the screen. And they can be functional. You can extend this idea, but that's the capabilities of a very simple custom control. And imagine what you can do with the larger ones. If you want to see an online demo, you can go to the following URL. That will allow you to actually interact with the online demo. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay, our final presenter is Howard Greenberg, my partner and a co-founder here at TLCC. Howard's out of Boca Raton, and his topic, and I'll make you the presenter, Howard, his topic is what's new in 853 for XPages.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And hopefully my screen is showing now. Mm-hmm. And so I am going to just do a real quick review of some of the new things in 853 that would be of interest to an XPage developer. So the first, we'll talk about some things in Designer, and one of the new things is a Java design element, and this is for XPages only, so you could not use this in your agents. and it allows you to create a Java class that you can then reference directly in your server-side JavaScript or on your XPage. There's a full interface, uses the Java editor right in Designer, and so now you don't have to switch to the Java perspective to do any Java work. You don't have to create folders under the web INF and make that the source and go through all those steps. You just create a Java class here in the Designer and use it in your XPage. The next feature is really helpful, I think, for anyone doing anything with XPages, especially if you've installed anything like the extension library. You probably noticed your controls palette grew exponentially and got very crowded. In 853, you can customize the palette, and not only that, you can also create different profiles for the palette. So the way you get to this is to right-click in the controls palette and choose Customize Palette, and you'll get the image on the right. And then you can create a new palette. Once you create the new palette, at the bottom part of this screen, you can choose what controls to show. For example, I created a new palette that did not have anything in the extension library or anything from the extension library in case I was working on a project where I knew that using the extension library was not going to work. So this is going to really simplify that controls palette and let you customize it for different projects you might be working on to bring in just those controls that you want to use for that particular type of project. You also can reorder the controls as well in the palette. Some of the other Designer changes, the first one is going to be real important for shops that have multiple developers, and that is the use of a source control enablement system. So it does not include the source control system, but there are some free ones out there like SVN. And Nicholas Heidloff has a good tutorial of how to set up SVN with the new Domino Designer source control enablement system. So that's something, if you have multiple developers, you might want to look at, and many of you might already have a source control enablement system and this will allow you to check in and check out different design elements to different developers. Another good feature is that there is now a much better JavaScript editor for your client-side JavaScript, and all the preferences that can be set in the Domino Designer preferences will now work. In addition, some of those preferences, in particular I found the font setting, will also work on the server-side JavaScript editor, but not all the preferences will work in the server-side JavaScript editor. That's still the old style editor, and I think there are plans to update that in future releases. Another nice little feature is from the design list. All the different design lists, you now can have a button to sign all design elements. In 852, that was only on certain types of design elements, and now every design list will have the Sign All design button on there. If you've ever got tired of the info box opening up when you opened up a traditional Domino design element like a form or view, and that info box would always come up and you didn't really want it to pop open, you can control that with a designer preference now. You also can rename the alias now from a design list. And we have some new perspectives. So there's an XPages perspective and a Forms and View perspective. So if you're a traditional Domino developer, the Forms and Views will get rid of all that XPages stuff. But since you're in this webinar, you're probably going to also like the XPages perspective. And that will hide a lot of the traditional Domino stuff that you would not use when you're working with XPages. You also have preferences to control what design elements show in the Apps Navigator, and that way you can really fine-tune the Apps Navigator to work the way you want to work. Okay, getting into the XPages part, we have some new properties. There is basically the first one allows you to set some of the Dojo properties for the XPage itself at the XPage level. And these were just things you could set before on the all properties, but were not surfaced on one of those tabs, and now it's just on a tab. The second bullet here is something you don't want to use unless you're having a problem, and this is a change IBM made back in the 851 time frame, and that may have affected some of your older apps, and you would then want to check this box to evaluate the entire XPage when a partial refresh was done. Again, the main reason I put this on the slide is do not check this off unless you have a problem and know what it does. And this will be on the application properties, so don't think that it's in the performance section. This is going to improve your performance. This will actually make it worse. Something that will improve your performance is to aggregate all the JavaScript and CSS files in your XPage. So you just get 1 or 2 downloads instead of 20 different files being downloaded to the browser. This can really, really help your performance, and we suggest you turn that on unless you're having problems with it, which I don't see what you would potentially run into. Again, this is in the application properties in the XPages tab. If you've used the show XPage for instead of a form, so when someone opened up a form, they got an XPage instead, you now have that capability to do that for views. Another performance improvement for the Notes client is you can have the XPages engine start up when the Notes client starts, and then when the user loads an XPage in the Notes client, it'll be a lot quicker. And you can also, in the Notes ini file, preload certain applications. So those will speed up the loading of those particular XPages in the Notes client apps. Both of those settings are in the Notes ini file. 853 uses Dojo 1.61 now. It has the older versions if you need them. And it also has One UI version 2.1, which has some improvements. And last on this chart is a real quick and easy way to deploy the extension library using the update site. So in the past, the update site was used for widgets and things like that. Now you can deploy plugins with it on your server. So this isn't a client thing. This is a server thing. And you can have the server that has the update side on it. You point to it in the Notes ini file with a parameter, and it will load the extension library. So you don't have to copy files to the server hard drive anymore to certain directories. You just use the update site database, import in the extension library, you change your Notes ini file for that server, and restart the HTTP task, and you're up and running with any sort of plugin like the extension library. Okay, there's a couple other properties, not all of these are something that's real useful, but some of them is, well, one that might be kind of useful to you is things like a panel control. If you don't want it to surround what's in the panel with a div tag, you can disable the container tag. Kind of related to that is also for panels and other container controls is in previous versions the panel would always create a div tag. Now you can specify like a p tag or a span tag for that particular control. There are also ways to set the doc type now in your application properties, and you can also set HTML5 attributes for controls, just about all the controls. The file download control, there's just a way to change the image and a message that appears when you go to delete a file. And show disabled for read-only attribute means that when you're in a read mode, you can still see the input controls, the box around the control, kind of like it was in read mode, but it will be disabled. Let's see, another thing is on your view data sources, you can sort the full text results now by selecting a sort column. There is a property now to run the web query save agent. This is on the document data source. And the other thing you can do is in your server-side script, you can now call client-side script that will run after the server-side script runs. And in the example here in my server-side script, I had a variable SC that was a string that has the JavaScript that I want to run on the client, and then I just say view.postscript and pass it in that string of JavaScript code, and that will run on the client after my server-side script is done. And finally, there are some new methods for both LotusScript and Java, and this works like the FT search method that's been around. This is in the view class, and now we can specify a column to sort the full-text search results by. And one thing that I got caught up on is, if you're fairly new to Java, I think you know that, or you've learned by now that Java, you have to have your parameters all match. So this FT search sorted has about 6 different parameters. They don't have every possible combination. There are 12 different ones, so you got to make sure you use one of the valid combinations for Java. Of course, LotusScript, you can skip those trailing parameters, and those are optional, and that's not a problem. Okay, so just a little word about TLCC. We do have a free Introduction to XPages course out on our website, as well as XPages courses that are self-paced. And we also have a schedule for instructor-led online and can come on site to your company to do training as well. GBS, who is co-sponsoring this event, is also a reseller, so if you're a GBS customer, contact your GBS salesperson. Now, for the webinar attendees, we are offering a special discount, and that you can find the details. It's 20% off, tlcc.com/webinar. And through next Friday, we also have a sale. So anything on sale, you can get 5% off on. All the details are on that website. We have some upcoming webinars. The one on November 18th, I think, will be very interesting. In the new extension library, there is a whole set of relational controls that will let you set up relational data sources that will let you access relational data just like you do with your Domino data sources, the view and document. And we have Andreas from IBM who's going to lead that discussion. And then on December 15th, we're going to repeat this format where we have several XPages experts and then have the Q&A. And speaking of Q&A, we're going to go and start the Q&A now. So you do have a questions section in your GoToWebinar software, and go ahead and put your question in there, and we'll answer your questions mostly verbally. But go ahead and put your questions in there, and we'll do our best to get to them. And we're going to keep going until we run out of time, or we answer all your questions. So, Paul, you want to take over?
Okay, thank you, Howard. And as Howard said, start to post your questions into the question area. And where appropriate, if you want to direct your question to one or another panelist, certainly indicate who the question's for. Otherwise, just put in a general question. And just so you know, Paul, Richard just increased his Java head, and it's immediately faster, so he wanted to thank you on that tip. Reminder to all the panelists, if you can make sure that you're unmuted at this point. And
thank you. That saved me yelling into the microphone.
Okay.
It doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
I've got a question from Atul, and he'd like to know how to create some dynamic formatting for an input control, for maybe to capture a phone number in a North American format, so that, you know, as the user is typing in the numbers, you know, the first 3 numbers are automatically formatted with open and close brackets to identify the area code, and then, you know, the next 3 numbers are separated from the next 4 numbers with a dash, and so on. So anyone on the panel have any ideas on that one?
I can run with that one. This is Chris. Keep in mind that that is a very simple client-side JavaScript thing, and don't think of XPages as I have to do everything on the server. The beauty of XPages is it's delivered over a web browser, except Xpink, but that's neither here nor there. If you find, just hit Google and search for client, JavaScript, and you'll probably be using a regular expression to do the parsing. But that way, on key down and on key up can actually you load client-side JavaScript functions for on key down and on key up, and it will actually take your input and format it properly for you. I wouldn't round trip back to the server in order to make that formatting change. You can totally handle that with client-side JavaScript, and that's the technique that I would use.
Okay. Question from Jessica. Can we get more detail on the notes INI parameter to enable the preload of the XPages engine and applications?
Paul, I just posted that in the questions pane. So the first one, XPages preload equals 1, will load the XPages engine in the notes client. And then you have XPages preload DB equals, which would be the databases you want to preload. So you don't have to preload any particular databases. You can preload the engine, and that will kind of load the code. But then you have the option to also load the databases that you specify in this second parameter.
Okay, question from David. When your page fails with a mysterious command not handled exception, where's the logging? Where we can get some detailed logging on that? How do you best troubleshoot that? Who wants that?
Yeah, I'll take that. The best thing to do is to go to the application properties and turn on the XPages tab. There's a show default error page checkbox. If you check that, then you'll get a much more detailed error page, which should highlight the line of code which has failed and give you a bit more detail on the error. If that fails, then you can start digging down into log files on the server, but I find they tend not to actually offer that much assistance because they're more to do with low-level server stuff than actual application error codes. Beyond that, then you can start adding error trapping to your code using try-catch syntax, and then use a plugin like OpenLog or your own logging application to actually write those error messages out somewhere, whether it's to the server console or to a database, and you can then track your code a bit easier. And if you're writing Java, then you can actually step through your code line by line, which is just a matter of setting up your Domino Designer client to be able to do that. It's not a difficult thing to do.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
The only thing I'll add to that is a lot of time when I've gotten that specific message where something bad happened on the server and it's not giving you a lot of detail, there's actually an XPage error.log file that gets written to the IBM technical support directory, and that typically has more detail than what you'll find in log.nsf. So if you have access to the Domino directory and you can get into there to that folder structure, then again, a lot of times it'll provide more detailed information on those archaic errors.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Paul. Okay,
Paul, I'll take this one from Oscar. I'm sorry if I mispronounced her name. Oscar asked, is it possible to open a document using different XPages from the same view? For example, clicking on the link in column 1 will open in one XPage, clicking on the link in column 2 will open another. And yes, you can do that. What you want to do is in the view column control, you want to go and add a link control. that would enable you to then use the on-click event to, when the user clicks on that particular column, you could then redirect to another XPage using one of the simple actions, or you could write some server-side JavaScript code to open another XPage.
Okay, I have a
I'll
question.
add to that if
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to take 2 seconds to add. Awesome tip if you want to go crazy and you treat the view almost like a notes document collection. You only create one column, set the header to not show, set the contents to not show, and now you have a container that you can load an XP panel. And then you set the panel to a Domino document data source that is wired to the view entry. And now you can do whatever you want. You can create 15 links that open up a document with a dialog, open up a document in a new page, in a new window, do whatever you want. But now you have complete control over the document, and you don't even have to have a view outside of, there's a document in here, and here's the sort order. You don't need to worry about the columns. Oh, I don't have this column. Let me go back and modify the source view or anything like that. You can really start playing around. Once you grab that panel, once you create that panel, bind it to the view entry. One caveat to that, you're going to want to make sure that within that data source, you set ignore request params. Otherwise, it's going to overwrite and it's going to mess it all up. But that's the most fluid, but that's really beyond the RAD techniques for developing XPages. That's when you're really comfortable and you're not afraid of breaking or taking down a few servers along the way.
Yeah, let me add, I think, Chris, you have all that on your website, and you put some on your blog in the last couple of weeks. You've had some real cool examples of using that type of technique in using the view control. So your website, your dominoguru.com, is that right,
Yes.
Chris? Oh, yeah, so check out Chris's blog because he does have some cool examples of what you can really do when you tweak the view, like you said.
And while we're talking about your blog, Chris, there was a question from another Chris, and it's for Chris Toohey. What's the URL to that sample database? So if you could find that question, Chris, and just post the answer, or even post it into the chat, and I'll move it over.
I can do that.
Question from Michael. Is there a way to launch an XPage in a frame inside the Notes client? Anyone? I'm going to say no unless anyone else jumps in.
Are they talking about loading it inside of an iframe instead of loading it in a separate tab?
I'm going to read it as a frame in your default Notes frame set.
The only way I can think of would be using composite apps to launch XPages. But it's not something I've ever done.
You might want to try the Notes URL syntax to an XPage and open it as a link as opposed to like a named resource. So it would be notes, if it's a local database, notes : /app.nsf xpage.xsp. And if you can get that to work, then you can put that in as the source URL for a frame. That might work. Haven't tried it.
Okay, I've got a question from Ryan. I'm using the default rich text field, but when I add an image and then resize it after saving the document, it does not retain the resize. How do I get around that? Plus, I tried upgrading to the newest CK editor, but can't get that to work. Any help would be great. Anyone experienced that? Not saving changes to an image? the rich text control.
No.
I haven't tried that, but as far as the CK editor, I've always just whatever IBM CK editor version is the one I use. I haven't heard of any technique to use a different CK editor. I don't know if anyone else has heard of that, but basically just use whatever IBM provides.
Yes, I guess just to quantify the question, they're putting an image into the CK editor interface or the rich text editor that's served by the CK editor in the web browser, resizing the image inside the rich text field and saving it, but it's not retaining the resize, but it is retaining the image.
Ryan, if you can wade in and clarify that, whether or not it is retaining the image as well, just not the resize. Okay, and we'll see if Ryan appends to that question.
Okay, in the meantime, here's a quick one that Chris did mention by Mahendran. Can we use the same custom control multiple times in the same XPage? And yes, you can do that. It doesn't have the limitation that Domino Forms and Subforms has.
Correct, and I couldn't post to the entire audience URL, so I submitted it as a question. So you might see that pop up. I didn't have permissions to go out to everybody. Sorry about that.
Okay. I guess, Don, maybe you can make everyone the organizer so they can answer questions. Kieran, you got a question with the new Java class. I assume you mean the new Java design element, and how can you integrate XPages with FileNet? I'm assuming you're using a jar file with, that's what you have as a FileNet jar file. And so the new Java class isn't going to or Java design element isn't going to really help you with that, but there are ways to bring a jar file into your application and have it be part of the application if you do a Google search on that. Or the other option is to bring your jar file into the server directory structure, and then you can access it there. There is a certain directory on your Domino server where you can put jar files.
Okay, question from David. Does the panel have any best practices for adding drag and drop actions to an XPage application and ensuring these will be supported across all browser platforms?
Well, you had us right up to the end there. So, yeah, there's drag and drop functionality in almost all the toolkits, and Matt could speak to some of the other ones, but Dojo specifically has drag and drop capabilities. So the yeah, and that works for the most part in Chrome, Firefox, Opera. Of course, your mileage is going to vary when you get to Internet Explorer, although we've seen fidelity in Internet Explorer 8 and 9 be a little bit better with the toolkits. Matt, I don't know if you've got a different experience with jQuery and EXTlib.
I've certainly used drag and drop in jQuery and Mootles, and both work very well. I've not used EXTlib for a while, so I'm a bit out. I've not used drag and drop in EXTlib, sorry. So other than the standard Dojo drag and drop, it should work. I've had issues where the Dojo drag and drop's not working on iOS devices, but other than that, it should just work.
Question from Richard. Are you noticing most customers doing XPage development for the browsers or the Notes client? And I'll append to that, what about mobile?
So my customers, I've never had any live application deployed in the Notes client up until 8.5.3 anyway. The performance issues were just too great to get over. So I've done almost exclusively normal web client interfaces. In the last 3 to 6 months, I've just seen a dramatic upswing in the amount of mobile web development that we're doing. And that's made especially easier with 8.5.3 again, because of the version of Dojo that ships. It's much better on iOS and Android devices.
Most of the demand that we've seen has been for the browser-based, not so much the Notes client-based. But I can definitely echo what Matt said. There are people who maybe never thought about mobile development, now that the tools have lowered the barrier to entry, are looking at it. And at the end of the day, the end user populace is demanding it. They want to be able to access corporate functionality from their mobile devices. So they're definitely kind of driving that. So you're going to see mobile requirements being pushed not only from the top, but also from the top down, but also the bottom up. So definitely something developers want to put on the radar.
Yeah, I'll certainly echo that as well. You see this huge opportunity, and that's really what XPages are for the typical Notes shop IT professional. It's an opportunity to take an existing application and extend its usefulness. Now, you don't even need to modify the original design. You can take a separate Notes database and via remote data sources, you create a data source and say, go get that database. And now you have full CRUD, create, read, update, and delete capabilities within a siloed environment that you can conditionally roll out to people via, mobile or web browser, that actually interacts with the Notes database and treats the Notes database as a container while it's being used in production with the Lotus Notes client or the web browser interface that you have existing. So it can be conditional rollout. If you can evolve those applications either by, getting my feet wet and creating those apps, or going full bore and deciding that, Lotus Notes is getting me there. It's got amazing offline capabilities. It's an amazing product, and I don't want to recreate the wheel just because I have this new technology. But XPages allows me to take this enhanced user experience not only to the web browser but also to mobile devices, and the support, the organic support within the community to foster those development efforts is amazing. And I cannot stress it enough for the IT professional who's considering getting in to development. XPages will give you, quite frankly, more life out of the Lotus Notes Domino platform. And if you're not learning XPages now, you better start. Sorry, I'll get off the soapbox now.
Okay. Well, let me put you back on there, Chris. Question from Russell. And it's for Chris. Have you had any luck nesting two custom controls and passing parameters through the first control onto the second nested custom control?
If you're going to daisy chain the composite data, so let's just say we go back to the example of the blah custom control. So I have blah that has blah in it. So blah contains that blah. You can pass, yeah, I know. Sorry. If I had a whiteboard, we could do this. You pass through the composite data, and then you use the composite data to define the property value of the child custom control, which thus becomes composite data. And Russ, just hit me up afterwards if you want to talk this one out. I'll invariably write a poorly worded article about it, so just stay tuned.
Thank you, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Paul, let me grab this one from Richard on the new web query save agent. That's in 8.5.3, and this lets you run your old web query save agents or any agents you have by specifying the name of the agent. I haven't noticed that it runs twice, I will point out that one issue with this is that the agent has to be set to run as web user. And if it's set to run as the signer of the agent, it won't work. However, in 853, one thing I didn't mention is that IBM fixed the bug. And in your server-side JavaScript code, like you could use one of the events for the document data source, like the save document, query save document. And there you can run, call an agent and pass in a document context, and you can do that using the session as signer session variable. And so you would get the session as signer, and then you would go from there to call the agent and pass in the document context. So that there is a way to run your agents that might have been set to run with a higher privilege than the web user had. So it's just kind of getting a little off topic, but I'll have to try setting up a scenario to see if it runs twice to see if that is an issue or not.
Have a question from Density. In a view control, when I click a document link, I want to open the form in Dojo mode. How do I do that? And I'm going to read that as the native form, although I might be missing something here. Anyone want that? I certainly don't think you can do it, not the way I'm reading the question.
Well, if you want to double click, like if you're in the web and you're clicking a link that is launching the document that's based upon a form, there's a form property that says load XPage instead. And that doesn't necessarily load Dojo mode, but I mean, that loads it up in the XPage, and Dojo is available to the entire XPage.
So aren't they always opened in Dojo mode, if you will?
Technically, yes. I mean, because
so just the way you would open a document data source from any view control.
Right. So maybe you had just like you were serving up the traditional view, not an XPage-based view, and you clicked on a link that opened a document that's based upon an underlying form design. In that form's properties, you can say load XPage instead, and it'll load, the XPage representation of that form design, not the Domino HTML generated one.
Okay.
All right, Paul had a question, how to develop XPages on one server and move them to a later server regarding the server name. I think it's kind of like what we did in Notes and Domino development before. You never want to hard code in the server name, and you do have the @dbname function available to you in XPages as well as your traditional Domino development. So yeah, I think it's just a question of never hard code in your server name and always compute that.
Yeah, I'll add to that with relative data source pathing. If you're using the paradigm of I'm defining a data source for in a remote notes database, I've moved to a practice of defining those in a resource bundle, preferences.properties. Simple text file, you store it in the file resources, define, DB1, and then it's DB1 server, DB1 file name, and you define the server name and the file path, and you use that, you use a resource or a theme to set the resource bundle var preferences, and then it's preferences, square bracket, quote, DB1 server name, quote, square bracket, to reference that server name. And the beauty of this technique is if you need to change the file name or you need to change the server name in accessing remote databases or external databases to the one that you're in, you can do it without a rebuild. Changes to a resource bundle do not require a rebuild. So you can go in there and you can say, oh, you know what, I'm moving this application into production now, I've tested it, I don't need to rebuild, just point it somewhere else. So hopefully that helps you get away from the hard coding of any server or database path or even view names.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Question from Martin, and Paul Calhoun, you did reply to this one, but I want to extend it. The question is, are the elements in the extension library tested on all browsers? And Paul responded that he has done some personal testing on Chrome, Firefox 6 and 7, and IE8. Can't comment on full testing, but what I want to expand this question to is, can any of the panelists comment on the future of the extension library and the latest release, and you know, from kind of a support point of view?
I will just, before talking about that, I will just add, apart from testing on all browsers, the thing that hasn't been done mainly with the extension library is localizing. So Martin's in Holland, I think, and various European countries, if you're relying on translation strings for settings and properties and that sort of thing, they won't be there. So that's really the most obvious issue that you'll have with extension library.
What about the future of the extension library and talk of update packs and IBM support? Anyone want to comment on that?
Hey, Paul, can you hear me?
There are amazing, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Chris. Wait in.
Oh, there are amazing things coming. I don't want to say that I'm technical editing a new book that's coming out, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. But there are amazing things coming. The social enabler happens to be one of the coolest things out there, and it's going to allow us to take XPages beyond the traditional the idea of, oh, I'm building this enterprise application. You combine that with something like XWorks, and now you can create these amazing SaaS offerings with, oh, your authentication is via Facebook or via LinkedIn or Twitter, anything that uses OAuth or OpenID or any of the other OAuth variants. And it's absolutely amazing. And that's just one of the many wicked cool controls that are coming. And there's such an eagerness to participate and build these from within the community. It is an amazing result from an investment from some of the best and brightest in the field. And they're brilliant. I just stand back and bask in their glory. So.
Anyone else want to talk about what we're seeing in the extension library and the evolution of that?
Well, okay,
I can say personally that I just got finished working with the 853 when the update to the 853, and I always felt that the extension library was kind of a skunk works that was hard to work with, but they've actually changed the UI considerably. That they promoted a lot of things to what Maureen refers to as the pretty panels. When you drag controls over from the palette, you get prompt dialog boxes that walk you through implementing some of the controls. So it's significantly more user-friendly than it's ever been, and I think that's just a precursor to it becoming available, as an officially supported extension pack from IBM. So, it always added, great functionality. You just had to work really hard to sometimes uncover what it was. Today, they're lowering that barrier to entry to make it significantly easier to implement.
And I think the other big benefit that we've got now is that with 853, the deployment of it is so much easier. In the past, it's been a bit of a struggle with some administrators to actually get the extension library deployed onto production servers because they're not allowed or they don't want to put jar files out onto the server. But with the new update site deployment method, it really negates that objection, and it allows us to basically put that on every server and not have an issue now. It's a much easier process to go through.
And when they realize that nothing's actually written to the hard drive, that it's all just being served in memory out of the NSF, then yeah, it's significantly more palatable.
Okay, thanks. Question from Karan. How to display a complete view as HTML on an XPage, not just a single column from the view?
Is that outputting the view as pass-through HTML, or?
Well, in a column, I mean, you can specify the output type as HTML, right? So
yeah.
How do you do that across, I guess, every column within a view?
You can use a theme and tell it to set the view column escape equals true. Or is escape equals false? Whatever one sets the HTML. I don't know. I'm turned around. But you can use a theme. Just create a theme that extends web standard or extends whatever theme you're using now, and its only only property is, or only value is control. I think it's XSP view column. I'd have to look in the web standard theme to find out what the handle is for the view column, and simply say that the escape property name escape value true or false, whichever one it's supposed to be. But that way it'll go across the entire, every single one of your view column content, your view column values will be HTML. It's sort of an elephant gun to kill a gnat, though. You might want to stick to doing them individually or setting a theme ID and applying it that way. I'm very weary of doing these, these huge changes that could affect everything because it will invariably affect the one that you don't want it to affect. So just a word of warning.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Question from Bob here. I found that the link control displays oddly in the IE browsers. Should this be attacked with CSS, or is there another property that might help control that? Anyone seen this?
Our default answer to that is don't use IE. And I know that's not the answer you're looking for, but
I don't know if you can call that a property to control it.
Yeah, well, the one thing you can do, and we've had some success with this depending upon the version of Internet Explorer you're using, if you want it to behave a certain way, you can actually test what version of Internet Explorer the end user is using, and you can force what we call compatibility mode, which is going to allow the CSS to display a little bit more deterministically. So that's something you can try is, when the XPage loads, look and see if they're using the IE browser. If they are, force compatibility mode. And it doesn't change the end user browser settings. It just basically changes the rendering of that page, for that page load to believe that it's being loaded in IE7 versus IE8 or 9. So try that out and see if it alters it. You should get a better experience there.
Question from Curtis: how to render XML data in an XPage?
Ooh, I'll take that one. There's lots of different ways that you can incorporate XML data into XPages. There's the ability to create an X agent instead of a regular agent. that serves up XML from basically any source. You can go and you can open a URL in an X agent that returns XML. So you can do pseudo web services. You can actually take notes and domino data served up as XML. There's a parser that is built into the back-end server-side JavaScript. So you've got the Java, XML, and XSLT processing engine in Java. You have those same things in all your modern browsers via client-side JavaScript. So you can do XML-based parsing in client-side JavaScript as well as server-side JavaScript. So you can take an XML stream, apply an XSLT style sheet to it, and then just present the results in the browser. You can take an XML stream, parse it, and then create notes documents out of it that you write to a back-end application and then refresh the view. So lots of ways to incorporate. The big thing is the parsing capability, and again, you've got parsing capability in the client and the server. So the things that you can do with XML are pretty much limited only to your imagination.
Okay, question from Atul. Can we refresh different parts of the XPage on one event? So partial refresh. The question was for 853. This has been around, I believe, since 850. Can anyone confirm that partial refresh on an event has been available from initially 850? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah. Isn't that question saying refresh 2 areas of the screen on one single partial refresh?
It doesn't say that, but you want to take on that variation of it?
Well, there is some client-side JavaScript you can write called there's a function called xsp.partialRefreshGet, and what you can do is hook on to the completed event of once you've fired one partial refresh, you can go off and write your own manual partial refreshes that go off and refresh other elements on the page, and you can chain those together so that you have one div or whatever refreshing. Once that's finished, it will go off and update another area of the screen, and you can link as many of those as you want together.
Wow, that solves a lot of organizing, XPage organization problems that I had. Thank you, Matt. Question from Anil. Is there a file upload control which supports multiple file uploads removes?
There's a project on OpenMTF which does exactly that. I can't remember what it's called, but if you just look for multiple uploads in OpenMTF, and you can download it, and it's a single custom control you can just drag into your application.
And the multiple remove is supported by the...
Yeah, multiple remove is there by default, yeah.
Okay. Question from Sachin. And I think we've lost our other moderator, Howard. But let me try to field some of these. How can we provide sorting of the docs in a view control as we do in the Notes client? I think that's natively built into the columns of the view control. You have the column header sorting capabilities for on-the-fly sorting, so that's available in the view control. And the only underlying requirement for the view is that the column in the view design also supports on-the-fly sorting through the column header. Anyone want to comment on that?
The only caveat to that is that in order to be able to sort column data in XPages, the underlying view column has to be set to be able to be sorted. So, one of the misconceptions is that you go into an XPage and you see that, that sorting property, and it may be grayed out. So you switch over to the source view and then you add the sorting, tag or the sorting attribute to the header tag, but clicking on the sort header in the XPage won't do anything unless the underlying view column is, has its sort property turned on to ascending, descending, or both. So as long as that's set in the original view design, then you should be able to, sort those within XPages just as easily.
Question from Michelle: is it possible to merge the cells in a table in an XPage? I am certain that that is yes. Anyone have a
in design
variation?
mode, definitely. Yeah.
Question from Gregory.
Yeah, check out call span.
Okay, thanks. Gregory asked, what about localization methods to develop an XPage application into multiple languages? The official properties way are complicated for translators and need to be rebuilt after a code update.
The way that we do this is using resource bundles. So a resource bundle is something you can add to an XPage, and then you can refer to the properties in there using server-side JavaScript. And if you just have a key value pair of label name and then the label value, you can just have a different properties file for each language and then decide which language file to load as the XPage is loading. And we use that in a lot of the Gucci applications.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
And that's actually, sorry, that's documented on the Domino Designer wiki if you search for localization on there.
All right, I have a question from Ryan. What's the best source for documentation on property details? For example, things like page node tree, or sorry, page tree node.
There's a project on OpenNTF, the documentation project, that's a plugin to Designer, that basically what it will do is once you've plugged it into Designer, you can right-click on any application and then produce the API documentation, and it'll produce JavaDoc documentation for pretty much any library that that application uses. So it'll produce API documentation for the core XPages, any custom controls you created in that application, and if that application is represented or utilizes the extension library, then it'll also produce API documentation for every component of the extension library. So it's really an invaluable resource. You should check that out.
This is Howard. I'm sorry for the being missing, but we had a power failure and my battery backup didn't last too long. But in regards to documentation, one of the nice things about the extension library is there is a set of HTML documentation, and it has not only the controls in the extension library, but also has all the standard controls that come with XPages. So if you get the extension library and go into in that big zip file, you'll see a documentation zip file with a bunch of HTML folders, and you can go in there and get some documentation. Paul, do you have any other questions?
I've got a question from Jessica. Can you recommend any resources for XPage mobile development?
Well, one thing, I think we talked about it a little bit before, right before my power failure, was the new extension library that was just released on Monday, that is basically the beta for what IBM is going to release, has a all new set of mobile controls. Now, Nicholas Heidloff has on his blog, he's put up a video that introduces these mobile controls that are in the extension library, the new extension library, and he also has some sample database. So I think that's the best I've found so far, at least in the last 4 days that this has been available. If anyone's seen anything else there, obviously go on, Chris.
I recorded a webinar for GBS Ask the Experts or something like that. Don Friedel would be able to probably paste the URL into the chat because I forget where the heck it is. But the extension library mobile controls, they're awesome. Highly recommended. But I went an alternate route, just loading the iWebKit CSS framework and using a very simple technique of capturing the user agent and doing a conditional page include. So I had, let's just say it was document, was the document I was opening. It was either document browser or document iPhone or document BlackBerry. And I would conditionally load which XPage and include it dynamically, which XPage I was showing based off of the user agent. So the web browser version was this fully functional, it's a fat app delivered via web browser, where the mobile version was a thin, streamlined subset of the functionality. And it also interacted specifically with the native device. So when you clicked on the map button, it used the local Google Maps app or whatever app you had on the device versus trying to use an embedded map via Google, which the FAT app, the web browser-based application did. That presentation is online. The recorded session, I believe, is still online. The demo application is definitely available for download for free, rip it apart. And if we can't find the URL, I will make sure it gets out there to use.
Yeah, if you go to the gbs.com webpage and go to the resources tab, you'll find a link to the recording on there. So.
Oh, cool. Thanks, Don. I can never find it, so thanks.
I know Pete has a question. Is there any demos out there that has kind of like a Rolodex where you click on A and the view shows everything starting with A and so on? I think that's, maybe someone can jump in here, but I think something like that is in the extension library, isn't it?
Not sure, but Mark Hughes of Hughes Connect does a lot of stuff like that, and he also does a lot of stuff for mobile. So he has a navigator that's based off of alphanumeric navigator. It's also really awesome. He puts it on an iPhone, and you click to B, and it jumps to the B category, sort of slides and transitions. It's really cool. That's been the only application of such a navigator for a view control that I've seen. And he would be able to speak specifically to it. And he's a nice enough guy, not a complete jerk, so hit him up. Hopefully he heard that, the jerk part, not the complete jerk part, but, hit him up and he will definitely help you out. And if you have any questions connection-wise, contact me and I'll relay you over to him.
Talk. Thanks for watching. To engage in conversations with us, visit twitter.com/gbsknows. To stay up to date, like us on Facebook at facebook.com/joingbs. And to watch entertaining and informative videos, visit youtube.com/gbsknows. And don't forget, visit our website and send us an email at gbs.com and info@gbs.com. Thanks again.